Welcome to Hockey Wiz Talks podcast. Today I'll be talking about players to avoid and bounce back players in fantasy hockey. In this podcast, I talk about players to avoid and bounce back players in fantasy hockey. Players to avoid in fantasy hockey. Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel's future is very uncertain at the moment, so drafting him in fantasy hockey is a huge risk. If Eichel is still stuck in Buffalo, he won't be worth picking early in drafts because he might not even play. Jason Robertson. Even though Jason Robertson had a fantastic rookie year, I would still avoid drafting him because he is headed into his second season, and the sophomore slump is a huge concern for young players, such as Robertson. Since Robertson is ranked so high this season, it is not worth the risk because you can get a player with better production later in the draft. Vladimir Tarasenko. Vladimir Tarasenko is in the same situation as Jack Eichel, where he demanded a trade from St. Louis, but it still hasn't happened yet. If Tarasenko is not traded by St. Louis by the start of the season, he is a player to avoid because he has not played well the last couple of seasons in St. Louis. Mira Heiskanen. Mira Heiskanen may be a really good defenseman in real life, but for fantasy, he may not be as useful because he doesn't play on the first power play unit, nor does he play on the first pair for Dallas. For this reason, I think it is best to avoid drafting him early in fantasy drafts. Jacob Chichurin. Jacob Chichurin is a great defenseman. However, he will be playing for the Arizona Coyotes, a team that will be terrible this year. So even if he is scoring points, his plus-minus is going to be terrible and will cancel out his offensive production. I would go as far as putting him on your do not draft list. Philip Grubauer. Philip Grubauer had a fantastic season last year and ended up winning the Vezina Trophy, but this year he is playing for the expansion Seattle Kraken, who will not be as good as the Colorado Avalanche. I would shy away from drafting Grubauer because it is unknown how good Seattle will be. And now a word from our sponsor. Check out my scouting blog at hockeywiz777scouting.com. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at hockeywiz777. Bounce back players in fantasy hockey. Elias Pettersson. Elias Pettersson was almost out the entire season last year, but this year he should be healthy and back to form. Pettersson is a top 20 player when healthy, so draft him accordingly. Taylor Hall. Taylor Hall will be playing for a much better Boston Bruins team this year and could have the best season since his MVP campaign in 2017-18. While Hall is no longer a superstar, he can still be a productive player for you in fantasy now that he is surrounded by top-tier talent in Boston. Cam Atkinson. Cam Atkinson will be playing with a chip on his shoulder more than ever after being traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. He has always been a pretty reliable goal scorer, and playing with better players in Philly will only help him. Not only will Atkinson have a bounce back year, but he could potentially have a career year. Quinn Hughes. After a sophomore slump last year, Quinn Hughes should have a bounce-back year and be back to being a 50-point player. Hughes is a great defenseman to have, especially if your league weighs heavily on power play categories. Don't hesitate to draft him early in drafts this year. Zach Werenski. Zach Werenski had a down year last year, but this year he is primed to have a monster year now that he is out of the shadows of Seth Jones and will be the true number one defenseman on the team. Werenski could be a steal in the draft because he had a down year and he plays for Columbus. Thatcher Demko. I talked about Thatcher Demko as a breakout player as well, but Thatcher Demko didn't have a great year last season, so he also fits the category of a bounce-back player. With a healthy Elias Pettersson back and Quinn Hughes poised for a breakout year, Demko could also be poised for a huge season as well. Demko could also be considered a sleeper as well because he had a bad year and is ranked quite low on the ranking. I will have more fantasy hockey advice when it gets closer to the draft. Stay tuned. In my next podcast, I make season predictions for the 2021-2022 NHL season.